Now, the integrity of local government elections across Nigeria and confusion over the scheduled council polls in Rivers State following conflicting court orders from a Rivers State High Court and the Federal High Court in Abuja. They've become quite dramatic. Now, the judiciary has again been dragged into the drama with two courts of coordinate jurisdiction granting conflicting orders. Let's bring in Samson Itodo, the Executive Director of Yaga Africa. We also have in our overflow studio Afolabi Adekaiyoja, who is a research analyst at the Center for Democracy and Development. In the meantime, let's start with Samson Itodo. Samson, I mean, you've been watching developments. Let's look at the wider picture before we narrow it down to what's happening in Rivers State. First off, I mean, let's talk about integrity of local government elections. A few states have conducted elections, and where you have a particular party, governing at the local government level, the party actually wins all the seats. Is that even normal? Is that envisaged at all? What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much. When you look at the conduct of local government elections in Nigeria, what you see across the state is a travesty, of electoral integrity. And some of those elections don't meet the integrity test. And we know for sure that what goes on at the local government levels is nothing like elections. It's electoral coronation, as some have put it. And it's just disappointing to see how those elections are conducted in a manner, that strips the people of the opportunity to elect leaders of their choice. The institutions at the state level are fundamentally weak because they do not have operational independence and financial independence. And what you see happening, it's not necessarily elections. And it's a shame to actually call some of those activities electoral in nature, elections, because to a large extent they are not. And it just goes to speak the level of impunity, of our political class, who always want to capture power at all costs, not to advance governance, not to advance the good of the people, but just to advance their selfish interests. So we're gravitating, towards a one-party sort of local government system, and that does not bode well for our democracy.
Well, it has become quite interesting, especially now that local government autonomy is back, but it seemed like a hijack in place. Itodo, please, I'll come back to you quickly here. Make sense of this whole talk about how we can actually free up the local government. On the one hand, it looks as if it is free, but with what we're seeing in terms of conduct of elections into grassroots government, we're still far from getting there. What are we missing in this business of grassroots governance?
I think we're missing quite a lot. And first, we must commend President Tinubu, who instituted that legal action in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court engaged in judicial activism by expanding the interpretation of the Constitution, by granting the local governments, financial autonomy. What is expected is that the bottlenecks that we believe was standing in the way of advancing local governance, have been removed by virtue of the decision of the Supreme Court. And so local governments are now accessing funds directly. But the Supreme Court also went ahead to say that if a state does not have a democratically elected local governments as envisaged by Section 7 of the Constitution, then they are not qualified to access those resources. So that judgment will deepen local governance, because that's the closest government, to the people. And now it's the point about the leadership recruitment, process for the local governments. And what you can see, this month, October, is what we call the super month of local government elections. Because right after, the judgment of the Supreme Court, we've seen states, organize local government elections. The one that held in Anambra, this last weekend was the first time in 11 years. This would have been the 12th year since Anambra had local government elections. So we're beginning to see elections. But the big question is the quality of those elections, because these elections, you still have logistical issues. You still have situations where, you know, the state independent electoral commissions just write results without actually following the due process or counting the ballots in a way that it confers some integrity. So the quality of these elections have been called to question. But the big question, Suleiman, is that the state independent electoral commissions need to be strengthened. Currently, their operational independence is subject to the approval of the governor. They don't have financial autonomy. And that's why, you know, the governors can whimsically interfere, you know, with the operations of the state independent electoral commission. So if at the national level, INEC have been granted operational independence because its operations is not subject to the approval of the president, whereas for the state independent electoral commission, their operations by virtue of provisions of the constitution is subject to the approval. You know, grant the state independent electoral commissions autonomy and see if they won't conduct, you know, better elections.
So that's where it's at. Now, Afolabi Adekaiyoja, let me bring this to you. I mean, based on the foregoing, how do we begin to bring back the integrity of the local government elections? What needs to be done at that level to restore integrity?
Well, like Samson already mentioned, we need to see a situation where the sex are actually strengthened. And right now, there's a current bill on the floor of the National Assembly trying to create another national institution to try to manage elections. And really, if you want to have stronger elections, really about strengthening these institutions at the state level. But then it goes beyond that. Beyond financial autonomy, it's even a case of how we effectively manage and actually check what is going on. And there are multiple stakeholders. The stakeholders involve both the political parties themselves. In states in Gombe, in 15 of 17 local governments in Yobe, opposition parties didn't take part in the local government elections that just took place. And that's because they felt that it was already going to be compromised. So there needs to be stronger scrutiny, stronger oversight, and even just stronger management and a better adjudication process to make sure that when there are issues or if there are challenges, that they can be effectively resolved by the court of law. And then we also need to make sure that through different groups such as the media, political parties, CSOs, that there's better attention and there's better focus on local government elections. Local governance as a tier in Nigeria has been historically and quite frankly sadly marginalized for a long time. And it's, again, credit to the president for actually instituting the suits that actually led to this particular situation. Now, a case where we have 15 local government elections taking place in 1 year and 9 taking place in October. But the main challenge here now goes beyond just the suits and goes beyond just the autonomy. It's about making sure that there's actually the requisite level of attention and scrutiny to make sure that the elections are actually not just free and fair, but that also hold value for the citizens that they are meant to serve.
And Afolabi, let me stay with you for a bit because this looks like a case of he who pays the piper calling the tune. So how can we truly, because listening to Itodo earlier on, if you don't have the money, the man with the money tells you where to sway. So it comes back to dealing with that sore point, Afolabi.
Yeah, so one of the big issues, again, beyond just the money, is even just about the standardization of these particular processes. So you do have some SECs that have really strong personalities and also people who are experienced. But then there are some situations where governors just use that position to reward party loyalists, and obviously they will also ensure that their party continues to stay in power. So we're looking not just at the financial autonomy, but also on the quality and the caliber of those who are appointed to lead these different institutions. We're also looking at ensuring that the autonomy, especially when it's financial, is actually enshrined in the law, so that even when a new governor comes in and even when there are different attempts to try to sideline or to even stifle the commission, that these things are not allowed to proceed accordingly. So it's a very big issue, and it's not something that will be resolved in one particular year. But beyond looking at the financial autonomy, beyond looking at the people who are appointed, ultimately it comes down to Nigerians and to citizens actively being invested in the local government structure, looking at the responsibilities that local governments have across the country. And they're actually really important, ranging from primary and, for primary education and even healthcare. So there are many key things that local governments deliver. And it's important that we actually give attention to those who are put in these positions. And we ultimately are the ones who put them there. So it's really about the scrutiny, it's really about the attention, and also about ensuring that citizens are vigilant and pay attention to their particular process.
Itodo, let's narrow it down to what's happening in Rivers State. I wonder how mind-boggling it is for you, where INEC says we have not, released the voter register for the local government elections, and then you have the state electoral commission saying we have a list, we have a voters list. As a matter of fact, we've had it since last year. What do you make of this, really?
I think what is happening in Rivers is laughable. But then this is what happens, with our politics. The Independent National Electoral Commission is being dragged into, this clash of personalities and politics happening in Rivers State. The judiciary has also been dragged into this. And I think a time has come, when as a country we need to send a strong message to the political class to refrain from, just dragging the judiciary into the mess that they create within our political system. On one part, the State Electoral Commission says it has the register. On the other part, INEC is saying we've not released this register because of a subsisting court order. Yes, INEC is a creation of law. It is bound by the rule of law, so he has to comply. And what she has done is it has complied. But if the State Independent Electoral Commission is claiming that INEC has, delivered the register since last year, this is just a matter that perhaps might be settled in the court. Because the big question is the register that the State Independent Electoral Commission have, is that the updated register? Were there any updates done by INEC prior to now? These are questions that need to be asked. From all indication,
is the same register that was used during the general elections.
Well, if that's the case,
so that
again,
be the case.
This matter is already before the courts, so I think it's sub judice, and we leave it to the courts to decide. But then, I think it is important that we protect our institutions, and the judiciary deserves, some protection. INEC on one hand also deserves some protection, because the Constitution says that, yes, the conduct of local government elections, the State Independent Electoral Commission will rely on the voters register compiled, by INEC, because that's one of the second role that State Independent Electoral Commissions have, is to advise, INEC in the compilation of the voters register. And so if it becomes a tension, and this is something we are beginning to see, this is not the first time a court has issued an order restraining INEC from delivering the voters register. It happened in Kwara. And all of this, though a new phenomenon in our electoral process, is just indicative of the role that politicians actually play in undermining our electoral process. And it's really sad.
Speaking of which, let's bring in Afolabi for the benefit of that viewer watching. What's the racket about a voter register? Because the back and forth tells perhaps something that many may not understand. Why is this an issue?
Well, ultimately, it comes down to who's actually registered and who's actually qualified to vote, who, according to INEC, should actually be qualified and counted as a voter. And the challenge now comes down ultimately to the politicians. We already are very privy to the fact that there are clashes between the current governor of Rivers State and his predecessor, who's the minister of the FCT, and whether or not these particular things have already played out in terms of how different politicians and different parties are trying to actualize their different goals of taking control of the different local governments. So ultimately, when it comes to the voter register, it comes down to actually being able to carry out the vote. If the voter register is not received by the SEC by Saturday, then the elections can't hold, according to law. And the challenge is now the fact that, I think going back to what Samson had said, the people who actually go to court, who actually are also politicians, they're the ones who actually take these institutions to court. So it ultimately comes down again to how politicians are trying to, involve the judiciary, to weaponize the judiciary in the electoral process, and that's a big challenge. That's something that politicians and political and parties should actually try to refrain from, to ensure that ensure that the electoral process is not ridiculed and is not, dragged through the quagmire.
And it's already being dragged, believe that. Itodo, the Supreme Court in its ruling on local government autonomy or full autonomy actually said that the funds that should go to the local governments would be withdrawn or withheld if, until the local government elections do hold, democratically elected, local councils. But in a situation where the federal government said, look, we'll give you 3 months, that's the state governors, 3 months to hold the elections. Now imagine a situation where the Rivers election does not hold come Saturday, October 5. What does that mean? Because if the funds are withheld, what happens to the teachers, at the local government area and what have you, people who need to be paid? What are the implications of this?
I just pray that we don't get to a point where funds are withheld by virtue of the fact that elections did not hold due to certain political reasons that were avoidable. It will be the most unfortunate thing to happen to Rivers State or any other state. Because when politicians, play dirty politics, they forget the impact it has on the average person. Because all of these contestations isn't necessarily about the common good. It's not about the woman who is in the market struggling to feed her family. It's not about the man who is on the farm, trying to make ends meet. It's not about the average Nigerian. It's about their ego. It's about their interest. It's just about primitive accumulation of wealth. And that needs to stop. And we just hope that, all of this will be addressed. But to say this, that the federal government has a 10-man committee or 10-person committee to implement the decision of the Supreme Court. We, as civil society, welcome, the decision of the Supreme Court because it alters not just the balance of power, but it will deliver development to people where they are. And I just hope that, whatever the situation is, these matters are addressed so that elections, don't constitute, or the failure of not conducting election does not constitute a clog in the wheel of the progress of people of Rivers State, just because some individuals decide, to bicker amongst themselves and not necessarily think about the common good of the people of Rivers.
Well, Samson and Afolabi, many thanks for your continued service to Nigeria.